Go ahead.
What is your legislation? You've got to propose that.
It's a simple bill, because remember, now let's go back to the Constitution. Congress shall coin the money, which they're not doing. And I think they should have created it as paper or numbers. I really don't care. Do you really care what you use for money? You just want to make sure it spends when you want something, doesn't it? I mean, you really get all fuzzed up what you have in your pocket?
I don't want to carry around potatoes.
I wouldn't either. I wouldn't want to carry around gold.
What about nationalizing the Fed and bringing it into the Treasury?
Okay, are you going to use the same kind of money? And you're going to let them do the same thing? It'll make a difference whether the Treasury loans you the money or the bank does. You're still in debt.
Well, as a vehicle for...
Well, why would you want a loaning vehicle? Why didn't you spend it to build something that we need? Now go back to the Constitution. And it also says Congress shall provide for post offices and post roads. That could be easily construed that they ought to build this for them, right? So if they create the money and spend it to build the roads, now you have the perfect vehicle to bring the money into circulation. You pay the actual man who does the work. When he gets through working, you've got something we can all use. You don't have to tax him for it.
As Reagan did.
Well, he borrowed the money.
Yeah, he borrowed money, but he spent it.
Well, yeah, but he still put us in deeper and deeper in debt. Why didn't he just spend the money? He didn't spend it. There would have been no debt. The people that got paid, and they had the transportation when they got done, wouldn't they? They wouldn't have roads that's fallen down and bridges that's fallen down. Nobody ever heard of a bridge falling down in Minneapolis now, have you? I don't think that's ever happened here, is it? But it could happen.
Byron, too, again, the fix being, to look at the legislation and the money gets spent back into...
Only for something that benefits the entire society.
And the defined amount of money versus this infinite.
No! You got $57 trillion of debt to get rid of. What are you worried about? You'd have to get rid of $57 trillion of debt before you didn't have a buck. How many roads did it take to spend $57 trillion? I don't even think you could do it. But just think about this. Think of the economy we could have if they spent these in. And I talked to a guy in the building trade that said, man, it would be so easy to heat these roads in Minnesota so you never had ice on them. Because when we build a road, we have to build a foundation just like you do with the house. When we're down there, if we just shove the pipes in the ground, we could heat all these roads in Minnesota with geothermal heat and a little bit of electricity, and it wouldn't have to do it.
Right.
It cost a little more to build the road. And why don't we put all brand new sewer systems in here too? Can you imagine the people that could go to work doing this?
Right.
Then you could develop the thing so when a deer come up, you had a little electronic signal that chased him away. When the car went by, so you wouldn't even have any roadkill. And now you'd have all kinds of money that you worked for. You know, it's a lot easier to spend money that you borrow than it is money you work your ass off. I know that for a fact. And if you got the mindset that I have to save for an emergency instead of, borrow when I need it, can you imagine? And then you don't even have a clue how much money you would take. Has anybody ever farmed or been around farms or know anything about them? Don't they start a harvest in Texas and go all the way to Canada for wheat?
Yeah.
How much money would the elevators have to have before they buy all that wheat if they couldn't borrow? Wouldn't they have to have it on hand that they couldn't buy when the harvest started? And wouldn't they have to be selling that grain to somebody else in order to get the money to buy it the next day? And somebody's got to have this money, and they got to have it in savings. If you get too much money, it turns into too much savings. How many of you really believe you could have too much savings? Raise your hand. Do you really believe you could have too much savings? That motion didn't carry. I mean, think about these things. You know, it's time we start using this thing for something to wear our hats on. And then it's time we get something down below that's got some real strength to it, a real set of whatever, or some real guts, not the fat one. And we actually start taking the country back. And we start where they're the most vulnerable in an idea that we can do that we don't even have to do any risk except just call. You don't even have to go down and see them. Just make sure they can't use their phones for a month. Probably going to take 10 days. I probably went 3 or 4 days, actually. And them guys would be breaking down the doors to vote that in. So everybody quit that phone call. It's that easy. And being we can do it in the state, we can do it in every state. Now, when they get people to understand that wealth money based on production is the only kind that works, now you can address the other problem. Now you got money in the system, so you can get rid of the other system. And you can wipe off the debt. All the debt that the federal government owes the banking system could just disappear. Wouldn't hurt anybody. They never done anything anyway. They didn't have any risk. They just created a number. So if you wipe the number off the books, nobody would know the difference. Now the actual money that you, as a retired person, have invested in savings bonds, that obviously has to be honored. And I think the pensions have to be honored. And be real truthful with you, if they took away my Social Security, my wife and I'd starve. I just don't like that concept. I've never starved, but I don't think I'd like it. And I've been cold, and I don't think I'd like walking around in Minnesota without any clothes on either. Although that might put me in jail, which would probably keep me warm and give me a suit, so that might not be so bad either. But that ain't just exactly where I think I want to live. But see, this is what we have to begin to understand. This is the only place we can really attack and be successful. Because there's nothing wrong with, you can't even get you a criminal charge by just calling your legislator. Don't swear at him, don't do anything, just keep calling him and telling him you want this bill passed. And you're going to call him every hour on the hour until he passes it. 200 people do that, we have it done. Once they started creating money without wealth, then we'd begin to see the difference between wealth and debt. And we got all these, I shouldn't call them this, I'm going to, idiots running around saying, the problem is it's just fiat money and they print too much of it. Well, if they do that, how can we get deeper and deeper in debt? I never knew how a man could get debt spending money. I know how you can get the barrel of debt borrowing it, though. That happens pretty fast. So they get it all wrong, probably because that's the banker somewhere paying somebody to push that stuff. I have a sneaking suspicion of a lot of that. When I used to travel, there'd be these guys out giving speeches the same place I was about black helicopters, what they do, and everybody would rush by me and never even listen to what I say, and go listen to the guy talk about the black helicopters, all the bad things they was going to do to you. I never seen it happen. I got hit over my head, and I don't even want to talk about that one. That actually happened. I never seen these helicopters do anything to us. And I've watched and watched. They say Bernanke helicopter Bernanke, he just goes around and just flies this money out. I was always looking for that place. I wanted to get me a big truck and see if I couldn't get under it. I never had a problem with too much money. How many of you guys had a problem with too much money? Raise your hand. I want to see how many of you had a problem with too much money. Yeah, that goes in carry either. Hey, you have a question, let me go. Have I wore out my time yet?
Yeah, I guess it just like these big banks like Wachovia or JP Morgan went back 18 months ago now, or 16 months, whatever it was. They were like insolvent, and we had to give them all these billions of dollars to probably.
Go ahead.
Yeah, she does well. So I guess I just still don't understand why we had to give them all these billions. Because if the banks are creating this money out of thin air, or basically creating it with this fractional reserve system,
they've been creating it on your promissory note, based on your wealth that they can steal from you if you don't pay it back, and it's mathematically impossible to pay it, all of it, pay it back. Yeah. They didn't just create this out of thin air. You signed a promissory note, and most of the time a mortgage. That they could come out and take your stuff if you didn't comply, and every court in the land don't enforce that contract. But they got it on their books as a liability, and you can't get any court to enforce that contract. Pretty good deal, isn't it? Okay, now let's address that again. I know for a fact that you can't create your own money because I've tried 3 different times and I got beat up for it, and I got thrown in jail for it, and several other things. And I did it legally, according to their rules. And I went to lawyers and asked him if this was right. And I called the state's attorney, and he said, yeah. So when I did it, oh my God! You can't believe how much excitement that caused. Probably a lot more than I ever dreamed it would, I can tell you that. So now the banks are the only one that can create money. They created the promise to pay, they don't pay. How in the hell could they ever lose the money?